everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. I'm very excited to bring today's episode to you because this project has been on my needles for quite some time, and although it took a while and it was a lot of work, it was so worth it, and I can't wait to share it with you today. But as always, let's start with today's mug of the episode. And today, I'm using a brand new mug. Doyle got me this mug for Valentine's Day, and it's just from a local store here in Nova Scotia. But I love it because it has these beautiful bird drawings, and it is pottery, but it's pottery that can go in the microwave and the dishwasher. So I'm very excited about that because I have a tendency to drink my tea rather slowly and it constantly needs reheating depending on the day. So I love being able to just stick this in the micro and I can just heat up my tea. And today I'm just having some chai tea with a little bit of honey and milk. So cheers. And this is actually my second tea of the day. I've been drinking a lot of tea lately, and that's because I had my first cold in 3 years. Luckily, it wasn't too bad, but I have a system whenever I get sick, and the number one thing that I do is I drink lots of liquids. I usually have a couple of cups of tea. I have quite a bit of juice. I usually go with apple juice. I even drink broth. I usually just heat it up and drink it out of a mug, which I find is really great because I actually find it very, very difficult, and I never do it, to gargle salt water. For me, that's just, it just makes me shiver. I can't stand it. And it also makes me gag. So my way of sort of dealing with the grossness in the back of my throat, which people usually do by gargling salt water, I do by drinking broth. It's a much easier thing for me to do, and it's a much more enjoyable experience in my opinion. So I have all those things. I also have Gatorade, and here in Canada we can get these little pouches that are called Emergency, and it's basically a day's worth of vitamin C it's a powder that you mix in with some water. So I usually have one of those a day while I'm sick, and it usually, all those things together really help me to get over the sickness and makes me feel less awful. So that's why I've been drinking a lot of tea lately. So I've been going through a lot of my honey too because I put honey in my tea, and especially when I'm sick I use it a lot because I find that it really soothes my throat. But I'm on the mend now. I am over the cold. And other than a few coughs that I might need to edit out of this video, I'm back to normal, so it's great. And I've been waiting to do this podcast episode for probably over a week now because I finished this sweater right before I got sick. And I have been wanting to talk about it ever since. I honestly could not because I was run down, and then I had this phlegminess that I was clearing my throat and coughing a lot, and it would just have made a really horrible editing experience for this podcast episode. So that's why I put it off until I was feeling better, and I'm finally feeling better enough to do a podcast episode today. And today I'm going to talk all about my Eclair Raglan, which I have on right now. So that is the pattern I'm going to be talking about today. This is a brand new design from Penrose Knits, my friend Laura, and this pattern came out on Valentine's Day, so it's been out for a while now. I actually did not complete mine in time for the deadline, but I did complete what was necessary for the test by the test deadline, and that did change. Originally, when we started the test, Laura needed us to finish the yoke and one sleeve for the test deadline. But as some of the testers were getting to the split hem, they realized that there were some issues that needed to be worked out. So Laura switched it up, and we needed to have the yoke and the body done by the test deadline. And I am happy to say that I finished that just under the wire. Cabling takes a long time, and a tunic length split hem sweater that's all over cables and bobbles takes a fair bit of time. So I finished what was required of me for the end of the test deadline, but I hadn't finished the whole sweater by then, so I wasn't able to share finished photos and everything of the sweater. by the time that the pattern was released. So I actually have only just done mine recently. I took advantage of some gorgeous snowy weather that we have yet again here in Nova Scotia. It feels like we're getting all of our snow here at the back end of winter. We didn't get any in December, and I think almost none in January. There might have been like one small amount of snow, but like not like an actual storm of snow. We're getting most of our snow in February and March this year, because I'm recording it today, which is the 5th of March, and I'm looking outside and there's almost a foot of snow out there, which is like 25 to 30-ish centimeters for those of you who do metric. You're in Canada, we do both. We're weird. It's still beautiful. Don't get me wrong, especially in our backyard. We have a lot of trees in our backyard. We live on quite a wooded property, and when we look outside our window, it just looks like a snow globe. It's so beautiful, and it makes taking pictures out there really fun. So the other day, I took advantage of using the snowy background, and I took some gorgeous finished object photos. And as I'm going to show you, I didn't quite look like myself in those pictures. That's because I took my pictures cosplaying. For those of you who don't know that term, it means I'm dressing up as a character, and typically that character can be from either movies, TV, books, games, video games, I mean, anything that you like. And I am very fond of cosplaying as my favorite book character, Farah. Back in October of 2022, Doyle and I went to our local Comic-Con event, and I cosplayed as Farah, which I'll show a picture here because I absolutely love that costume. I am so thrilled with how well it came together, and I just had a ball. Everyone recognized who I was, which as a plus size person, sometimes that doesn't happen, because some people can't imagine a character as a different size sometimes, and they don't quite recognize it unless you're completely accurate to the character, and I don't necessarily have the skills or the time to be completely accurate. But the great thing about a book character is that there's room for interpretation. So I was able to do what I thought was my most Farah-like outfit, and luckily for me, she has a very distinguishing part of her identity, and that's the hand tattoo, which was all done with waterproof eyeliner, and it was super successful. I washed my hands a couple of times that day, and it never came off. Honestly, I had to really scrub to get it off at the end of the night. A not so good thing about that, though, was that I had to use a hair removal cream to take off my arm hair. You can't see my arm hair because I'm blonde. Like, you can't see it, right? But I couldn't draw on my hairy arm. Sounds so funny to say. I wasn't able to draw the tattoo on my arm with my arm hair, so I had to take my arm hair off. And let me tell you, and I did both, just so it would feel the same on both arms. I don't love the feeling of my arms without hair. It actually feels really, really weird. But I did it for the cosplay, and it was super successful, so over and done. So when I took pictures of my sweater cosplaying as Farah, because obviously it's a long sleeve sweater, I just did my hand. So I didn't have to, take off the hair on my arm. But anyway, yes, I took my pictures outside dressed as Farah, and I am in love with them. So I took a couple holding the book, but then I also took some, and these are more my favorite. I took some using a practice sword that we have, and it just makes me feel so badass, and I absolutely love it because to me, Farah is such a multifaceted character. She can be very, very feminine and very regal and sweet and beautiful and sexy, but then she could also hold her own in any fight. She is very powerful. She is very skilled because she does a lot of training, and Oh my God, she's just amazing. She's one of my favorite characters ever. And I loved getting the opportunity to dress up as her, both in the fancy version that I wore to HalCon and also in the more casual cream sweater. So, I should probably explain at this point why I cosplayed as Farah in my Eclair Raglan. And this is because, to me, the Eclair Raglan is the perfect personification of a sweater that Farah wears in the books. Specifically in A Court of Mist and Fury, Farah wears a sweater at one point. She wears sweaters multiple times, but I found one description of it in the book. It's when she first gets to part of the night court where she can finally choose what she wants to wear. Because when she's in the spring court, she is kind of told what to wear. So when she arrives at the night court, she has agency to choose what she wants to wear. And I love that the first thing that she chooses to wear is a sweater. And to me, that showed that she wanted to be comfortable for the first time in her life. And the sweater is ultimate comfort, or as Laura likes to describe it, maximum cozy. And trust me, this is maximum cozy. So when Farah wears a sweater, it is described as a pretty cream sweater so soft I could have slept in it. So going off of that description, there's really not much to identify the sweater other than its color and softness. And that meant that it could look like anything. It could be a stockinette sweater. It could be an all-over cable work sweater. It could be a tunic length. It could be cropped. It could have a big collar. It could not have a collar. But whenever I read those books, and I've read them a few times, I always pictured it as something with a turtleneck or a cowl neck, definitely tunic length because she wears them over leggings. And I always envisioned it as a cable sweater because to me, that is a cozy sweater. Now, that might just be my own preference for cables. I think they're really, really beautiful, and I think they make a very cozy garment. But that's kind of always how I pictured it. And I always thought to myself that I would make my own version of Farah's sweater at some point, but I never found a pattern that I really liked. Until back in the fall, Laura shared her first photos of her Eclair sweater. It was called the Eclair sweater then. It's now called the Eclair Raglan. And that's because someone came out with a pattern called the Eclair sweater before Laura released her pattern, so she changed the name so there wouldn't be confusion. So Laura's version is sort of like in this, what I would call dark beige, light mushroomy color. But as soon as I saw it, I knew that's the sweater I've been looking for to make a Farah sweater. And Laura reached out for testers in late November. And at the time I did say no, but that's because I was hoping to do a project throughout my Vlogmas episodes and have it to wear on Christmas Day. But if you've seen my Vlogmas episodes, you know that that didn't work out. So I did end up joining the test for this, and I test knitted size 6. The pattern is available in 9 sizes, ranging from a 33-inch bust to a 69.5-inch bust. I started testing this in the first week of December, and I only just finished it at the very tail end of February. So it took a long time. So this is a 3-month sweater for me, and that's because it is all over cable work and baubles. The baubles are actually optional. You don't have to do the baubles. I know some people are turned off by baubles, and I test knitted size 6, and it is an absolutely perfect fit. I adore the fit of this sweater. It is exactly what I was looking for a cozy tunic length oversized sweater. The sleeves are kind of baggy and they come down to like your knuckle, which is just giving me all the cozy vibes. You can just really snuggle up in it. It's definitely something that I would call a pretty cream sweater, so soft I could have slept in it. But anyway, yeah, I am so excited about this sweater. It is one of my favorites that I have made. Before this one, I only had one sort of like cozy turtleneck sweater because I I have a thing with my sweater necklines where I don't like them too tight because I feel like I'm being choked. So whenever I do a crew neck sweater, I usually start it off a little lower. I usually start off, if it's a circular yoke, I start off after the first set of increases so that I can have a wider neckline. Or I choose sweaters that intentionally have a wider neckline. So I haven't done that many turtlenecks or cowl necks, and oops, I got hooked on my earring here. There we go. So I usually don't do many turtlenecks because obviously they're turtlenecks, they're usually quite tight. But this one was more of a relaxed turtleneck, and it reminded me a lot of my Evening in the Village turtleneck, which I'll put a picture here. I have been wearing that sweater a lot since I finished it, and I absolutely love wearing it in the fall with jeans and boots. I just find it's like the perfect outfit because I don't need a jacket because the sweater is warm enough, and I feel nice and cozy having the turtleneck. And I've been wanting another sweater like that because I've been getting so much wear out of it. And when Laura showed off this pattern, it looked the same. It looked like it was going to give me the same vibe as my Evening in the Village turtleneck because they both have cozy necks, they are both tunic length, they both have loose sleeves, a split hem. It ticked all the boxes for me to be another sweater like that in my wardrobe. And the coziness of the Evening in the Village turtleneck was done using the waffle stitch. The coziness in the Eclair Raglan is, of course, the cable work. I chose to do the pattern with the baubles because I preferred that look. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to do baubles again because I wasn't very good at doing them. And my baubles are kind of, well, they look better now that they're blocked, I'm going to be honest. Before blocking, they looked pretty holy and they looked kind of sloppy. But I'm noticing now that it's blocked that the holes aren't as obvious. Like they are still there, but they're not as obvious. So as one of my knitting friends would say, don't knock it until you block it. So yeah, blocking totally fixed those. Of course, when you do a cable knit sweater, blocking is essential because when you knit it, it's all scrunched up. You won't know how it properly fits until you block it and those cables relax. So this was definitely one of those cases because I do have a photo of I have a couple photos actually from trying it on before I finished it, and you can really tell that it's almost skin tight in those pictures, and my split hem is like flaring right out. But as soon as I blocked it, it relaxed. That split hem is just hanging straight now, and nothing is super tight to my body. I've got really nice positive ease with this sweater. So blocking was essential. So I want to share a little tip that I did in this sweater that I have learned from doing other top-down sweaters. I like to do a little tip before I split my yoke and sleeves. I always finish off whatever the neckline is. So if that's just a little ribbed neckline, if it doesn't start with the ribbed neckline, or in this case a turtleneck, or in the case of Doyle's Montrealer hoodie, the hood, whatever you need to do to finish off the neckline, I do that before splitting for my sleeves and body. And that's because I want it to sit properly on my shoulders before I make the decision to split for the sleeves and the body, because if my collar is down to here before I do my finishing of the neck, that's going to make my yoke sit a little bit lower than if I finished my neckline. So I finished my turtleneck before I split for my body and sleeves because I wanted to have it sit properly on my shoulders before I determined if I had the appropriate yoke length. And it fits perfectly. So I wanted to share that tip with everybody. I noticed it for the first time when I did Doyle's Montrealer hoodie because when I did that pattern, the neck was like way out to here and I was like freaking out that his sweater was too big because I'd already split for the sleeves and the body at that point just because I was on a bit of a roll and I didn't want to do the hood yet because the hood was going to be complicated. But once I added the hood, oh my goodness, what a difference. It really brought the sweater up and like it kind of showed me that you really need to have those finishers before making decisions about where you're gonna stop your yoke and start your body and sleeves so that you get the proper fit. So, little tidbit to share with you all there. I also knitted this sweater without using a cable needle. I'm one of those knitters that I like to try different techniques and I like to learn different skills all the time. And cables are actually one of the first so-called techniques that I learned how to do when I started knitting. And I remember being so surprised at how easy it was because cables look really, really impressive, especially when you have a really intricate cable work design. But I knew when I took on this project, as you can see, there's a lot of cables. And I thought, I think I'm going to get very sick of this very quickly if I have to use a needle. So before I did this sweater, I had recently done the monument hat by my friend Hannah of Herb Garden Knitwear. And that was the first cable work pattern that I did not use a cable needle. And I was using really sticky woolly yarn, so I felt confident that it wasn't going to I wasn't going to lose stitches when I did those cables. So that was sort of my practice to try out cabling with a needle. And once I did that, I felt confident that I could do it with this pattern. And my yarn is still kind of woolly. It's not totally woolly. I haven't talked about that yet. I used Drops Lima, which I got from a local store here in Nova Scotia. It's a newer store and I'm really, really impressed with it. They only carry natural fibers and they don't carry superwash yarn. So when I needed yarn for this sweater, I got some yarn from them. And Drops Lima is 65% wool, 35% alpaca. So it's not super woolly, it's not super toothy. It has a lot of softness from the alpaca. In fact, that makes it a little slippery because when I was joining new balls, which you have to do pretty often because they're only 50-gram balls, I found that my knots weren't staying knotted, so I did a really good job of weaving in my ends to the nth degree. And there was a lot of ends to weave in on this sweater. It actually took me an entire morning to go through all of the ends and weave them in, but I'm very proud of my end weaving. There's only one spot on the sweater that I feel that you can see on the outside where the ends are, but I really don't care, so it's okay. But anyway, I did the whole sweater without a cable needle, and with the exception of one cable, they're all correct. I messed up one cable. Ugh. It irks me so much. Normally, I'm someone who has no problem leaving mistakes in my work because to me that shows that it's a handmade garment, and I usually have a philosophy that if you make a small mistake early on in the project, it's kind of like a talisman against making bigger mistakes later on. But this one, something about wrong cables really bothers me. To me, that's not just a design element that I will ignore. It bothers me so much, so much. It bothers me so much. And because of my yarn and how it acts, I don't want to fix it because in order to fix a cable after it's done, I can't ladder down to this. The sweater is done. I did not notice until the sweater was done. But you can fix it after the fact by cutting the yarn and regrafting it. But I'm scared to do that because my yarn is slippery and I just don't trust that those little ends will stay knotted and not come undone later. So I've decided to leave it. I'll put a picture of the mistake cable here and you can pause my video, take a look, see if you can find it. I know I posted it in my Instagram story and most people said that they could only see it because I pointed it out or they only found it because they were looking for it. And fortunately, it's on the back. So in a way that also kind of helps me tell back from front when I'm putting on the sweater. So that's good, but it still really bugs me. But I don't think it's very obvious. I think it's in a place that it does hide pretty well. So I am learning to be more okay with this mixed up cable. And in the end, out of all the cables that are in this sweater, like I'm assuming there's like hundreds of cables on this sweater, I only mixed up one. So it could have been much worse, but I only mixed one. So because of all the texture and cables and baubles on this sweater, it does have some chart work and everything that you need to follow. It is an intermediate to an advanced pattern. And as such, it's one that I found tricky to find something to watch along with it, because it's not like a simple stockinette that I could not even look at it and just pay attention to whatever I'm watching. I needed something that was going to be more relaxed. So I tried not watching anything, and that was just like not enough. I found that I just kept getting distracted and wanting to look at my phone or do something, because I needed to have both something entertaining visually as well as working on my project physically with my hands. And I found a really niche thing to watch that I don't know if anyone else is into these, but I'm totally into them. I was watching video game playthroughs. Now, I don't know if you have a gamer in your household, but Doyle plays video games. I don't. The only one that I'm good at is Animal Crossing. And I only played once Doyle had everything set up already, so I just do like the fun, easy things. Because I'm just so bad at video games. I didn't grow up with them. I had the original Super Mario Brothers and I had Duck Hunt. And I was terrible at Super Mario Brothers, but I was very good at Duck Hunt. Because that one didn't require pressing buttons and jumping and moving at the same time. It was literally point a gun at the TV and try and shoot ducks. Like, it was easy. But after that, I didn't really have video games around me. Like, I had babysitters growing up that I would go to their houses after school and stuff like that with a bunch of other kids. And one of those babysitters had a Super Nintendo. So I played Super Mario World, but I was so bad at it. I'm still bad at it to this day. So I'm not really a gamer. I can't play video games. But I do love to watch people play video games. And I'm a little picky about which ones I like to watch. And Doyle has played some games that I absolutely love watching him play. Obviously, Zelda Breath of the Wild is number one. That is my favorite game to watch him play. It is absolutely gorgeous. And we are both eagerly awaiting Tears of the Kingdom. And he has lovingly promised me that he will only play it when I'm around so that I get to watch. And I don't miss out on anything. So I'm so grateful about that. I don't know how many other people out there have spouses who would do that for them. But I'm super stoked about that. And I loved watching him play an indie game called The Wild at Heart. So beautiful. The music is lovely, and it's just like a cozy game. It's not, too intense. And then the third game that I love watching Doyle play is Tunic. Now, if you don't know about Tunic, it just came out last year, and it was actually developed by somebody here in Nova Scotia. So cool. And it's a game that was like literally almost a decade in making, because Doyle actually met the guy who made it years ago at HellCon, which is our local Comic-Con. And it only got released last year. But it's a really unique game that needed all of that time to create it, because it's a Link style game, because the character is this little fox in a tunic, hence the name Tunic. And there are a lot of like Zelda-ish elements to it, but it's a game that provides zero instruction. You literally start the game and you just go. You have to figure out how to do the different things that you need to do. You have to solve a lot of puzzles. It's a very cryptic game, but it's so unique and it's so fun. Again, amazing music, beautiful visuals, and I just loved watching Doyle play this game. So when I was in the middle of doing my sweater and I was looking for something to watch, I stumbled upon playthroughs of these games on YouTube. And I'll share the links to the ones for The Wild at Heart and Tunic below. I haven't looked through the Zelda one yet because I was getting close to the end of my sweater, and like I was then doing ribbing and stockinette sleeves, so I didn't need to have more of like a a calm background style thing to watch at the time. So I didn't actually get to the Breath of the Wild one. But that's what I watched while I was working on this sweater. And it was so much fun because Doyle didn't want to play these games again. They were too fresh in his mind. He had only just done them. He wanted more of a break, and he was playing different types of games. So he didn't want to do that for my entertainment, which I can't blame him for that. I really can't. But I found these playthroughs on YouTube. So it was like I was getting to watch him play without him having to play the game for me. So it was a win-win in my case. And I specifically chose playthroughs that had no commentary. I know I could easily go to Twitch or find YouTube streamers who have like a little video of themselves playing the game in one corner while you see the screen of what they're playing and they talk through what they're doing. I did not want that. I just wanted the game itself. So I found these playthroughs that have no commentary, and they are just so soothing to watch. It's like listening to lo-fi music, but you have a visual to watch. So it was perfect viewing for knitting my sweater. So I just wanted to share that because I thought that was like a really unique thing to watch. And if you are interested in video games or gaming and that type of thing, you can check it out.
Hi everyone, Editing Whitney here in my office, and I'm using my work headset, so hopefully this will provide better sound than when I did my Vlogmas episodes and I did not use a headset and all you could hear was this weird background humming. So hopefully this is better. I'm also wearing a new sweater. This is a little sneak peek. I'm going to be recording my podcast episode about it soon. What do I mean to say? I'm going to be recording my podcast episode about this soon, but this is my Lento sweater, which is hot off the nails. Anyway, I needed to add this segment into my Eclair Raglan podcast episode because I forgot to talk about another problem that I encountered with my sweater, and that was a problem with the sleeves. So when I knit the sweater during the test knit, we were originally supposed to do the yoke and one sleeve, so I had previously started a sleeve when when Laura learned that there were some problems with the split hem and we had to change gears and do the yoke and the body and leave the sleeves for later. So I just left my sleeve on a cord and did the body, finished what needed to get done for the test deadline, and once the test was over, I came back and I went to working on the sleeves. And I made the silliest possible mistake when I came back to knit my sleeve, and that was that I did not double check my needle size when I put my needles back on the cord. And yep, you can probably guess, I used the wrong size needle. So my sleeves are supposed to be knit with I think I used US 8 needles, which is 5 mils, I think, and I used size 6 for the cuffs and the ribbing on the bottom, which I think is a 4 mil. Anyway, I had put my 6s onto my cord for the sleeves, and I did not notice until I got to the cuff, and I was rooting all through my needle case looking for my US 6s, could not find them anywhere, only to realize, oh my god, it's on my sleeve. I've knit like 14 inches of my sleeve with the wrong size needle. Talk about a facepalm moment. I could not believe I'd made that mistake. So I actually had taken some progress pictures before I got to the end of the sleeve, and I'm going to put one in right here so you can see there is a distinct line on the sleeve of the sweater, and looking back at it now, I can absolutely tell that the lower half of the sleeve is a completely different gauge than the closer to the shoulder part of the sleeve. So I self-pitied for about 5 minutes and talked it out with my fiance, and ultimately I decided to rip it all back and redo it with the proper size needle. And the reason I did that was, first of all, it's only stockinette. I can redo stockinette. It's not that hard, and it's easy to pick up. I have no problem with that. And the second thing was I had spent literally hours, days, weeks, months on this beautiful sweater. I did not want to cut corners this late in the game. So I did it. I went back and I reknit the sleeve. And I made myself the goal. I found the issue on a Friday night. It was my goal to get back to where I had been at that time, so right ready to do the cuff, by the end of the weekend. And right before I went to bed on Sunday night, not only did I get back to the cuff, I actually finished knitting the cuff and I bound it off by Sunday night, and that was around like 10:30 at night. So I did it, I managed it, and I am so happy I went back and fixed the sleeve of my sweater. But I forgot to mention that when I was recording my podcast episode, so I wanted to add that in now. So, and now back to the rest of my pre-recorded podcast episode.
So before I move on, I want to ask myself the question that I always ask, which is, will I knit this sweater again? And I honestly think I will. I don't think it'll be soon, but I can definitely picture another one of these in my wardrobe. I'm also kind of interested in doing the crop style that some of the other testers did. So Laura's a really relaxed designer, and she's so great to test for because she creates this really positive environment, and I just love testing for her. She's so sweet and so understanding when things come up and that type of thing. So it's really, really great. But some of the other testers really did different looks for this sweater, and I kind of like some of them. Like, I really love the idea of doing a cropped textured sweater. I think that'd be really fun and really stylish. So I think I would like to do a cropped one. Probably still with the turtleneck. I'm not sure, but I think I would like that. And I think if I was going to do a crop style, I probably would go down a size just so I would have more of a fitted garment rather than like an oversized cable knit sweater, cropped length. But that's definitely on my radar that I might do. I don't know what color I would do it in though. So I'll have to give that a think. But yes, I would definitely knit this sweater again. I would knit any of Laura's patterns again. In fact, I'm going to be doing that soon, but you'll have to wait for another video to hear about that. And now for some book reviews. I have 2 to talk about today. I was going to talk about a third because I just started a third book, but I'm not far enough into it to really give a good review of it yet. So I'll save that for a future podcast episode. But today I have 2 books to show you. The first one that I finished reading is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. And this is a book that Doyle gave to me. So for Christmas this year, Doyle and I gave each other a really unique gift. We gave each other a year of books. So what we did is we bought each other 12 books, wrapped them in brown paper, and wrote a little write-up about it on the outside that would give each other a hint as to what we would find, but it wouldn't tell us what that book was. So it was a bit of a mystery. And this was the first book that I picked out of the box that Doyle gave me. And on the outside, it just said imaginative fairy tale. But after we exchanged our first books, Doyle realized that I wrote much more on the outside of his books than he did on mine. So after I opened January's, he then went and added new ones for all the rest of the books. So the ones that I opened after that had more written on them. So this is the book that I chose for my January pick. So the first book that I picked out of the box. And it on the outside, it just said imaginative fairy tale. And I don't know if this is a book that I would have chosen myself, but I absolutely loved it. It actually reminds me of Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and that's one of my favorite fantasy books ever. So the premise of this book is that Alice and her mother are plagued with bad luck her entire life, and they're constantly moving from place to place, even though her grandmother is this really world-renowned writer of these dark fairy tales and has this really fancy estate and has lots of money, that type of thing. But they never go to her grandmother's estate, and then her grandmother passes away, and her mother gets kidnapped. And the only thing that her mother was able to leave behind for her was a note saying, "Don't go to the Hazelwood," which was the name of her grandmother's estate. And it doesn't give you a whole lot more than that. And I love that everything else that I read in the book beyond that initial bit was a total mystery. That's how it reminded me of Uprooted, because that's how Uprooted started. What you read as the plot synopsis was only like the first chapter or two, and then everything after that was a total surprise. And to me, that's one of the most enjoyable reading experiences. I don't want to go in totally blind and just pick a book that I have no idea what it's about, but I love a book that gives me a little teaser and then gives me this whole story that I didn't expect, and that is absolutely brilliant. It's a really fun reading experience for me, and I really, really enjoy it. I think it works best with fantasy personally, and that's the only way that I've really encountered it so far, and it's just so much fun. But this book was really, really cool. I was a little apprehensive at parts because it can be a little scary. And, you know, if I found that I was getting near a scary part and I was like reading it at night going to bed, I would just like close the book and I would read that part in the daytime the next day. But I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really inventive. The characters were really cool. There's like some really cool plot events, and it's like a mystery as well as a fantasy. I thought it was a really, really great book. I love that it crossed genres and everything. And in a way, it also kind of reminds me of The Shadow of the Wind, which is another one of my absolute favorite books, which is like a genre-bending book. But this is like a fantasy version of that. So if you like either Uprooted or The Shadow of the Wind, then I recommend this book. Now, my second book I don't give as glowing of a recommendation of, and that is Unraveling by Peggy Orenstein. And I thought I was going to love this book. I asked my mom to get me this book for my birthday, and she did. So I did feel that I had to read it once I realized that I wasn't really enjoying it. I'd still like kind of stuck it out. It's not very long. It's only about like 170 pages. It's pretty short. So the premise of this book is that the author, Peggy Orenstein, during the pandemic thought to herself that she wanted to go on an adventure of knitting a sweater completely from scratch. She was already a knitter, but she wanted to make a sweater that started off as her shearing the fleece of the sheep, then spinning it, then dyeing it, and then knitting up the sweater. And to me, that sounded really fun. I loved the idea of the sweater from scratch idea. Not something that I would ever do myself because no thank you. I like to have my yarn already done up. I tried my hand at yarn dyeing before, and it can be fun, but it's also a lot of work. And I'm happiest to have yarn that is properly spun to the size that I need. I'm not very experimental when it comes to yarn. Like, I really can't stand thick and thin yarn, that type of thing. And like, if you're going to spin your own yarn and you're a newbie to it, that's pretty much all you're going to get at first. So like, I would never do this myself, but I did want to read about somebody doing it. And I didn't like it from the first chapter, and I thought to myself, what have I gotten myself into? And the reason I didn't like it is that Peggy comes from a place of privilege. She is a rich white woman living in Northern California, and in some areas of the book, yes, she does check her privilege, because she does talk about knitting activism, and she talks about the Black Lives Matter movement and that type of stuff. But early on in the book, when she's talking about fashion and slow fashion and talking about how we should make the same ecological choices for our clothing that we do for our food, she comes off as really preachy. It's kind of hard to make the same ecological, why is that word so hard to say, choices about our clothing and our food, because if you have money, it's easy to make those choices. When you don't have as much money, it's significantly harder. And I just found that she was like really bearing down on the fact that we need to only buy from thrift and places like Depop, or from companies that are completely eco-certified, that use certain materials that have been shown that they are not harmful on the environment. They don't use processes that are harmful to the environment. And like, it was just, it really irked me being told that I should do this. And if I don't, it means I don't care about the environment. And, it just rubbed me the wrong way. So I was already kind of like first chapter or two in, and I'm already kind of like, oh God, what kind of book is this going to be like? But then it got better. In all the subsequent chapters, she was talking about the process of shearing the sheep, spinning the wool, that type of thing. But she was also talking about the history of those tasks. So the history of spinning, how far back spinning went, the history of rearing sheep, and how sheep became an animal that needed to be sheared for clothing and that type of thing, and how there are still some sheep varieties out there that are similar to the ancestral sheep that does not need to be sheared, and like that kind of stuff was so interesting. And the botanical dyeing chapter, I really liked that one. And I also really loved that she talked about these tasks as women's tasks, and she was talking about them as women's history. So after doing all those chapters that I really liked with this really cool history aspect and everything, the author went and then said something that I really did not like. She started comparing knitting styles, and she said that continental is superior to English style knitting. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because in my opinion, any way that you knit is, quote, the right way to knit. Because it's your hobby, it's your craft, do it the way you want to. So she mentioned this because she's talking about how a lot of women learn from their mothers or grandmothers how to knit. And she did not want to teach her daughter how to knit because she was an English style knitter and she wanted her daughter to learn continental if she was going to be a knitter. So I'm going to read you this section of the book because this really irked me the wrong way. She wrote, "Although she knows the basics, she hasn't much interest in pursuing the craft. She's been working on the same hat since she was 12. And significantly, I was not the one to teach her. I've refused. The method my mom showed me all those years ago is cumbersome and slow. If you are a knitter, you will know it as English style, which involves holding the yarn in your right hand and throwing it over the needle to create a stitch. It became dominant in the U.S. during World War II, when I'm assuming, based on her age, my mom learned. Because continental style, the quicker, more sensible way to knit, had originated in Germany. It feels too late to change for myself, but I wanted something better for Daisy." She basically said continental knitting is better than English style. And even if I was a continental knitter, I still would have a problem with that. But because I'm an English style knitter, the same style as the author, I really have a problem with that. Because in my mind, there is no correct or incorrect way of knitting. And there is no better way of knitting. Whatever way you choose to knit, continental, English, Norwegian, Portuguese, whatever way you want to knit, that's the best type of knitting for you. And that's all that should matter. There's no reason why you should be coming out and saying that one style of knitting is superior to others. The only difference between continental and English is that continental is faster. But why do I need to knit a certain way so that I am faster? Why do I need to be a faster knitter? I don't understand. This is my hobby. This is something I do for fun. This is something that I'm doing as part of a slow fashion movement. Why does it need to be fast? That's my personal opinion on the matter. And I take umbrage with the fact that she is saying that continental is better than English style. So that was a really big thing in the book that I really did not like. But that's just my opinion on the book. And if you have a different opinion, that's totally okay. We can have different opinions. I just found that really bothered me about the book. And overall, I only gave it like 3 stars. So it's like a very middle of the road book for me, because as much as I really loved those historic elements and reading about how she sheared a sheep and spun the yarn, dyed it, all that jazz, it really irked me that she was a very entitled person and that she had such strong opinions about how a person should knit. So that's why I didn't really love this book. So that wraps up this episode 16 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. While you're here, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and check out some of my other content. I mainly do podcast episodes as well as pattern roundup videos. But have a look around, see if it's something that you like. And there's not much else to say except everyone, take care. Happy knitting.